All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going really deep, tackling a question that's fundamental to all of international relations.
Yeah.
It's huge EE, especially if you're prepping for the UPSC exam.
Yeah.
But honestly, it's something we should all be thinking about.
For sure.
How does the world really work?
Right.
Is it every country for itself? Or is there some kind of order emerging?
That's the question, isn't it? It's the million-dollar question, really. And it's one that scholars and policymakers, they've been debating this for centuries.
Exactly. And to really get to the bottom of it, we're diving into some excerpts from a text that explores these very ideas. It goes from the concept of international anarchy all the way to the rise of global governance. So buckle up, everybody. This is where it gets interesting.
It does. It gets fascinating. This concept of anarchy in international relations, so often misunderstood. It's not about chaos.
Okay.
It simply means there's no overarching world government, right? No one dictating how states should behave.
So no global police force to lay down the law. That sounds a little unsettling.
It does create a unique dynamic, that's for sure. Think of it like, I don't know, a complex game of chess.
Huh?
Every country, they're making these strategic moves, They're trying to protect their own interests. And there's this constant need to balance power. You got to prevent any one player from just dominating the board.
Okay, so that explains the constant jockeying for power we see on the world stage, right?
Yeah.
Makes sense. But if there's no world government, why don't we see constant all-out war?
That's a good question. And that's where the concept of anarchical society comes in.
Okay.
It's this idea that even without a world government, right, states still operate within this framework of shared rules and norms. Think of it like a code of conduct. It emerges from the necessity of just coexisting.
So it's even in a lawless frontier town, people eventually figure out that, okay, we need some basic rules.
Yeah.
Just to keep things from completely falling apart.
Exactly. That's a great analogy. Take the Geneva Conventions, for example. They establish international legal standards, right, for humanitarian treatment in war.
Right.
Or look at the Law of the Sea. It regulates maritime activities and resource management. These agreements, they show how states can cooperate, even within a system where there's no ultimate authority enforcing those rules.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it. So we've got self-interest, right? That's driving states to compete.
Yeah.
But also this need for cooperation to address these shared challenges.
Exactly.
It sounds like a pretty delicate balancing act.
Oh, it absolutely is a delicate dance, for sure. And things get even more complex when we factor in the rise of these powerful international organizations, like the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Trade Organization.
Right. Those are the heavy hitters, the ones you see making headlines all the time.
They are. And their emergence, it marks a significant shift in the international landscape. Remember those collective dilemmas we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
Like climate change or a global financial crisis. These organizations were created in part to address those challenges. They represent a move toward greater global governance.
Okay, so is this where we start to see the emergence of something resembling a world government? Is that the end goal here?
Not necessarily, no. And this is where it's important to understand the nuances, right? The nuances of international relations. It's particularly important for UPSC aspirants. These organizations, they do wield significant power, yeah? But they are still ultimately accountable to their member states, especially the most powerful ones.
I see what you mean.
It's this complex interplay, national interests and global goals. They're always bumping up against each other.
Right. So it's not as simple as saying national governments are just being replaced.
Yeah.
By some all-powerful global authority. But things have definitely shifted since, say, the early 20th century.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the biggest drivers of that shift has been globalization. It's this force, multifaceted force. It's reshaping international relations in some really profound ways.
Yeah. Globalization.
Yeah.
The buzzword that everyone loves to throw around. But not everyone fully understands.
More than just a buzzword, though, trust me. It's this intricate web of interconnectedness, and it's impacting everything from economics and culture to politics and technology.
So it's not JST about trade and the global economy.
Not at all. Globalization has multiple dimensions. We see it in the way information flows across borders, right? Or how cultural trends spread so rapidly around the world, and how policy decisions in one country, they can have ripple effects across the globe.
So think social media, K-pop, and those global summits, where world leaders gather to discuss things like climate change.
Precisely. You got it. And for anyone trying to understand how the world works, particularly, our UPSC audience, they might be grappling with this in their textbooks. Breaking down these dimensions of globalization, it's crucial. Let's start with economic globalization. It's the most visible, right, and often talked about aspect, but it's important to go beyond the surface.
All right, let's dive into the economics of it all. What does economic globalization really mean for, say, the average person?
Well, think about the products you use every day, right? Your phone, your clothes, the food you eat. Chances are they've been touched by globalization in some way. They might be made in one country, assembled in another, and shipped all over the world.
So this shirt I'm wearing, it might have cotton from India, fabric woven in China, and was finally stitched together in Bangladesh.
It's very possible. And that intricate web of production and consumption, it's a defining characteristic of economic globalization. National economies, you see, they're becoming increasingly integrated into a single global system.
Okay, so it's all about interconnectedness.
Yeah.
But that raises an interesting question. Does this integration mean, like, we're all becoming one big homogeneous global culture?
That's where cultural globalization comes into play. It's this process where ideas, information, and cultural products, they just flow across borders. They influence and sometimes even clash with local cultures.
So it's not just about American movies and music dominating the world.
Not at all. Think of it more like a cultural fusion, yeah. K-pop, for example. It's become a global phenomenon. It blends Korean musical traditions with Western pop influences, and it resonates with audiences worldwide.
That's a great example. So we've got economic globalization, cultural globalization. What about the political dimension? What does that look like?
Well, think about the rise of those international organizations we discussed earlier. They represent a shift in power dynamics, right? Policy decisions are increasingly being made not just by national governments, but also on a global stage.
So things like trade agreements, environmental regulations, even human rights norms, they're being shaped by these international bodies.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
right. And this is where the concept of global governance becomes really relevant. It's this idea that we're moving away from a purely state-centric system toward a more complex web of actors and institutions, all involved in global decision-making.
So are these international organizations becoming the new power players on the world stage?
They are certainly gaining influence, yeah. But it's not as simple as saying they are replacing national governments. It's more like, again, that delicate dance of power and cooperation. National interests are often competing with global goals.
Okay, so it sounds like we've moved beyond that Wild West analogy, haven't we?
Indeed. The world is becoming far more interconnected and complex. And this is where understanding the nuances of globalization and global governance, it becomes essential, especially for our UPSC listeners. They'll be tackling these very concepts in their exams.
Right, so it's not just about memorizing definitions. It's about understanding how these forces are shaping the world around us.
Exactly. And that understanding, it's crucial not just for passing exams, but for being informed and engaged citizens in a world that's rapidly changing.
Well said. And speaking of engaged citizens, we've covered a lot of ground here, folks, from the basics of international anarchy to the complexities of globalization and the rise of global governance. But we're just getting started. Stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive. We'll explore some specific examples of how global governance plays out in the real world and delve deeper into the debate about whether anarchy is truly a thing of the past.
And remember, if you're finding this deep dive helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more insights into the world of international relations. We'll be back in a flash.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Before we went away, we were talking about the complexities of global governance. And this topic, often pops up in those UPSC International Relations papers.
Oh, yeah, definitely a favorite there. We talked about how organizations like, the UN, the IMF, the WTO, they're playing a key role in shaping this new world order.
Yeah.
But let's get down to, brass tacks here. Can you give us some real-world examples of how this global governance thing, actually works? What does it look like in action? Absolutely, yeah. Let's get concrete. Let's take climate change, for instance. It's this global problem, right? And no single country can solve it on its own, no matter how much they reduce their own WN emissions.
Right. Even if one country goes completely green, it won't matter much if the rest of the world keeps pumping out CO2.
Exactly. It's a collective effort, for
Yeah.
sure. So this is where international organizations come in, right? The UN Framework Convention on Climate Change,
Yep.
or UNFCCC for short.
Catchy.
They provide this platform, right, for countries to come together, negotiate agreements, set targets for reducing emissions.
Think like the Paris Agreement, right?
Yeah.
where countries pledge to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, that's a prime example. It's not perfect, of course. There are always challenges with enforcement, and some countries are more committed than others, let's be honest. But it does show how global governance can work, at least, in theory. It also demonstrates the power of collective action, a concept that's often tested in those UPSC exams.
Right, right. Got to remember those key terms. Okay, so that's climate change. That's one example. What about something a little more, say, in the realm of economics?
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's look at the World Trade Organization, or WTO, as it's commonly known.
Yeah, the WTO, we hear about them all the time.
Their primary goal is to regulate international trade. They want to make sure that it flows, as smoothly as possible, predictably and freely. Think of them as a referee, kind of, trying to keep the playing field level, prevent those trade wars from erupting.
So no more countries just slapping tariffs on each other's goods on a whim.
Ideally not, no. The WTO, they set rules, right? They provide a mechanism for resolving disputes and encourage countries to lower those trade barriers. It's not always successful, we have to acknowledge that. And there are valid criticisms, about their impact on developing countries. But the WTO, they play a crucial role in maintaining the stability of, the global economy.
It's like a global marketplace with rules, basically. So we've got the UN tackling climate change, the WTO keeping those trade routes humming. What about something like, I don't know, international security? How does global governance function in that domain?
Okay, let's think security. Consider the UN Security Council.
Okay, the Security Council.
They're tasked with maintaining international peace and security. They can authorize peacekeeping missions, impose sanctions on countries that, threaten peace, and even authorize the use of force in extreme cases.
So kind of like a global police force, but with a lot more red tape.
Yeah, something like that. It's definitely not as straightforward as a traditional police force. The Security Council's power is limited in a way. It's constrained by the veto power of its permanent members, the US, Russia, China, France, and the UK.
Right, the Big Five. So even in this realm of global governance, national interests still play a huge role.
They do.
It sounds like a delicate balancing act again.
It is. And that's a crucial point to remember, I think. Global governance, it doesn't mean the end of national sovereignty or the disappearance of, those national interests. It's more about recognizing that. In today's world, right, this interconnected world, many challenges, they just require cooperative solutions.
Countries are realizing they need to work together, basically, even if it means compromising some of their own individual power to achieve those common goals.
Precisely. That's the key takeaway here. Now, going back to that fundamental question we posed earlier, is anarchy truly dead? Have these international organizations really tamed that so-called Wild West of international relations?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? It's been on my mind this whole time. What's the verdict?
Well, as with most things in international relations, the answer isn't so simple. It's complex, lots of shades of gray. International organizations, they have become more powerful, that's for sure, and influential. In recent decades, they've helped foster cooperation on a range of issues, from trade to climate change to security. But
there's always a but, isn't there?
There is. Remember, these organizations, they're ultimately creations of their member states. Their power comes from the consent and cooperation of those states, especially the most powerful ones. If a powerful country decides, to go rogue, ignore the rules, well, it can throw a wrench into the whole system.
And we've seen this happen, right? With, for example, the U.S. withdrawing from international agreements.
Yeah.
Like the Paris Climate Accord and the Iran nuclear deal.
Exactly. Good examples. These examples, they highlight this ongoing tension between national sovereignty and global cooperation. Countries, they want the benefits of global governance, of course, the stability, the predictability, those shared solutions to shared problems. But they're also reluctant, They don't want to cede too much power or compromise their own interests.
It's like they want to have their cake and eat it too, which
Yeah.
seems to be a recurring theme in international relations, honestly.
It's a good way to put it. But it's important not to, paint a completely cynical picture. Despite those limitations, global governance has achieved some significant successes. Think about the eradication of smallpox, or the Montreal Protocol, phasing out those ozone-depleting substances, and the relative stability of the global financial system since World War II. These are all testaments to the power of global cooperation.
Okay, so it's not all doom and gloom. There's hope for the global sheriff yet.
There's always hope, right? But it's crucial to be realistic about the challenges. Global governance, it's a work in progress, definitely. It's messy, it's complex, and it's constantly being negotiated and renegotiated. The global landscape shifts. Understanding these dynamics, it's essential for anyone studying international relations, particularly, for those UPSC aspirants who are looking to delve deeper into this field.
All right, so much to think about. So what does all of this mean for, like us? For the average person trying to make sense of this increasingly globalized world, should we be optimistic about the future of global governance? Or should we be, bracing ourselves for a return to the Wild West?
Those are the big questions, aren't they? And there are no easy answers, unfortunately. What I can say is that being informed and engaged citizens, it's more important than ever. We need to understand how these global systems work, what their limitations are, and how we can hold our leaders accountable for making decisions that benefit, not just their own national interests, but the collective good of humanity.
That's a powerful message. And it resonates deeply with the spirit of the deep dive, I think. We're all about empowering our listeners with knowledge, encouraging them to think critically about the world around them.
And that's especially relevant for our UPSC audience. Grasping these concepts of anarchy, global governance, and globalization, it isn't just about acing exams. It's about developing that nuanced understanding of international relations, which is essential for anyone aspiring to, shape policy or contribute to a better future.
Well said. And for those of you who've just joined us, make sure you catch part 1 of this deep dive to get the full picture. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's still so much more to explore. Stay tuned for part 3. We'll grapple with some even bigger questions about the future of our increasingly interconnected world. Welcome back to the deep dive, everyone. We've come a long way, haven't we?
I have. It's been quite the journey.
From that theoretical wilderness of international anarchy to the bustling city of global governance. It's a landscape, teeming with organizations and agreements and those never-ending power plays.
And those power plays, they never stop, that's for sure.
They're fascinating, though, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. It's what keeps things interesting.
Keeps us on our toes.
Yeah.
We've also, unpacked how forces like globalization are reshaping the world, pulling us closer together while sometimes driving us further apart. It's a lot to process.
It is a lot to unpack.
As we, wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a question, something to ponder as they, navigate this complex world.
I like that, a good thought-provoking question. That's what the deep dive is all about, right?
That's what keeps us all coming back for more.
Exactly. And remember, this isn't just about, acing those UPSC exams, though we know it's crucial for many of you.
For sure. Big exam coming up.
It's about understanding these forces, right? The forces that are shaping our lives and how we can be active and informed citizens in a world that's constantly changing.
Well said. Could not agree more. So what's the burning question, the one we're leaving our listeners with today?
Okay, so we've seen how the world is becoming increasingly interconnected, right?
Yeah, definitely.
We're trading more, communicating more. We're facing these shared challenges like climate change that transcend borders.
Right, it affects us all.
But does that mean, we're headed toward a truly global society? A world where national identities become, less important, and we start thinking of ourselves as global citizens?
It's a fascinating question, I'll give you that. Imagine a world where the lines on the map, matter less, and we're all just working together to solve those global problems.
Yeah, a world without borders.
It's a utopian vision, but is it realistic?
That's the crux of it. On the one hand, we see signs, right, pointing towards greater global integration.
Okay, like what?
People are more mobile than ever before, right? Information flows freely across borders thanks to the internet, and there's this growing awareness of our interconnectedness.
I see what you mean.
But on the other hand, we're also witnessing, a resurgence of nationalism in many parts of the world.
It's true. We see it every day.
People clinging to their national identities, sometimes quite fiercely. And we see these political movements, right, pushing back against globalization.
So it's like a push and pull, right? A constant tension between these two forces.
Exactly. That tension is always there.
So is globalization ultimately a force for unity or division? Will it lead us towards a more harmonious world or further fragmentation?
Those are the questions, aren't they? The questions we want to leave you with today.
Big questions.
And there are no easy answers, I'm afraid. It's something we all need to, think about, debate, engage with, because the future, right, the future of international relations, the future of our world, it hinges on how we navigate these complex forces.
It's a weighty question,
Mm.
but it's one I think that's worth grappling with. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive
End of the road.
into the world of international anarchy, global governance, and globalization.
Mm.
We hope you found this exploration insightful
Mm.
and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
I hope.
If you're prepping for those UPSC exams, we hope this has armed you with some valuable knowledge, maybe even, spark some new ideas. And for everyone else, remember, staying informed and engaged, that's the first step towards shaping a better future.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
We've covered a lot of ground, that's for sure, but this is just the beginning of the conversation, really.
Oh, yeah, just scratching the surface.
We encourage you to, keep exploring these topics, keep asking those questions, and keep diving deep into the issues that matter.
Keep diving deep. That's our motto.
That's what we're all about here on The Deep Dive.
And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to, like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. We'll be back with more deep dives into fascinating topics soon. Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
We'll see you next time.